Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The Quad summit has been cancelled. Australia was hosting it. Biden has thrown a last-minute surprise, so the whole affair is off. He's dealing with a mess at home. His government may have to shut down. They've run out of money. It's the debt ceiling crisis we've been telling you about. It's serious, but it's America's problem. Why should it have a bearing on global affairs? Because it's America. Their presidents walk in and out of summits and deals as they please. Meanwhile, Europe has raked up the Russian oil issue again. Their top diplomat is talking about cracking down on India. We'll tell you why. In Kashmir, a G20 meeting is set to happen. The usual Western criticism is being thrown at India, complete with a US religious freedom report. In the UK, Rishi Sunak is grappling with political challengers from his own party, and the WHO says your artificial sweetener can have bitter side effects. We'll tell you all about it. The headlines first. Russia and Iran ink a deal to complete a major transport network, a move that aims to rival the Suez Canal. The international north-south transport corridor connects Russia to the Gulf and India. It's a freight network of ship, rail and road routes. Pakistan's Punjab government gives Imran Khan's PTI a 24-hour deadline. The government claims 30 to 40 terrorists are hiding at Imran Khan's Lahore residence. The PTI has been asked to hand over the so-called terrorists to the police within a day. Taiwan's Beijing-friendly opposition picks its presidential candidate. The KMT chooses Hu Yue, a popular mayor, over Foxconn's billionaire founder Terry Gou. The elections will be held in January next year. Taiwan's ties with China have soured under the current president, Tsai Ing-wen. A French court upholds former President Nicolas Sarkozy's jail term, but court allows Sarkozy to serve his time at home, wearing a tag instead of going to prison. Sarkozy was convicted in 2021 for trying to influence a judge. The UK will end no-fault evictions amid the housing crisis. Landlords can no longer throw out tenants without giving a reason. This is part of a long-promised rental reform. There are 11 million renters in England. And there's no escaping the heat. The next 5 years will be the hottest ever, says the United Nations. Climate change and El Nino to lead to the spike in global temperatures. You know what was the biggest diplomatic event this month? The Quad summit in Australia. It was scheduled for next week. Now it's been cancelled. Why? Thanks to US President Joe Biden. He's called off his visit to Australia, so the summit stands cancelled. And why won't he go? Because his own house is on fire. The Republicans are holding him hostage. The US government is running out of money. It needs cash, but the US Congress is not signing any checks. Biden has 2 weeks to fix this. Else there could be a government shutdown and a debt default, which will be a first in American history. So this is an emergency, and the Quad summit will have to wait. And this episode has once again demonstrated the perils of American hegemony. A couple of their banks fail, and the global banking sector loses money. Their politicians cannot agree on a debt ceiling, and the Quad summit gets cancelled. The Quad, as you would know, is a strategic grouping. It has 4 members: Australia, India, Japan and the United States. Leaders of all these 4 countries were supposed to meet in Sydney, Australia next week. This would have been their 3rd such meeting. Until 24 hours back, everything was on track. Then suddenly, Biden decided to skip Australia. He called his host, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. He said he won't be able to make it because he must resolve the debt crisis first. Australia found itself in a fix. It wanted to keep the summit alive, so it proposed a solution. If Biden cannot come, perhaps his representative could. Someone like US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, perhaps. But it did not work. Reports say soon after Biden's decision, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also pulled out. So Albanese just called off the summit.
The Quad leaders meeting will not be going ahead in Sydney next week. We, though, will be having that discussion between Quad leaders in Japan. I thank Prime Minister Kishida for his invitation for me to attend the G7, and it is appropriate that we talk.
Quick side note. Albanese attended the last Quad summit in Japan within hours of taking oath as Prime Minister. He did not want to miss it. But President Biden won't be able to fly to Australia, so the summit won't happen. Instead, the leaders will sit down in Japan for a chat. Japan is hosting the G7 summit this week. All 4 Quad leaders will be present, so they'll meet on the sidelines. Prime Minister Modi of India will be present. He'll also go to Australia, irrespective of Biden's plans. In Sydney, Prime Minister Modi is expected to address the Indian community, but no Quad meeting. And it's not the only casualty of Biden's decision. He's also called off his trip to Papua New Guinea. This was supposed to happen on Monday, and there were grand plans for it. Biden would have been treated like royalty. Reports say the government there had decided to shut down the country's airspace and declare the day a public holiday, also close key roads and have dancing groups greet Biden's motorcade. It was a grand plan. Why was he going, though? To meet leaders of the Pacific Islands. Prime Minister Modi is going there too. They're all making an outreach to the Pacific. They've ignored the region for a long time. China has benefited from it. It has stepped in to fill the vacuum. Now Washington wants to regain its turf, and Biden's visit would have helped. Consider what an expert in Australia said about this, and I'm quoting. The mantra in the region is all about turning up. Turning up is half the battle. China turns up all the time, and so the optics aren't great. That's right, the optics are not great. American domestic politics has bulldozed the Quad summit. The China policy can wait, the allies can wait, the Pacific nations can wait. American politicians cannot. That's the message going out. And there's no progress with the budget negotiations. Biden met with the Republicans, no deal yet. Although both sides sound more positive now.
Look, it was a good and productive meeting. Everyone agreed that default would be the worst outcome, a horrible situation for America and America's families. But we also agreed that we need to pass a bipartisan bill with bipartisan support in both chambers.
I think we set the stage to carry on further conversations. The president agreed to appoint a couple people from his administration to sit down and negotiate directly with my team, so I found that to be productive personally.
So they promise a deal, but can't say when. The world, meanwhile, is on the edge. A US default would spell disaster. The White House released a statement yesterday. It said, and I'm quoting, President Biden will return to the United States on Sunday following the completion of the G7 summit in order to be back for meetings with congressional leaders to ensure that Congress takes action by the deadline to avert default. So until Biden gets the money to run his government, world affairs will have to take a back seat. And this has become a hallmark of American diplomacy now. This breach of trust, lack of dependability, lack of policy continuity. President Trump did it with the Paris climate deal and the Iran nuclear deal. He walked out of both of them. The world suffered the consequences. Then Biden came to power. He rejoined the Paris Accord. He promised to revive the Iran deal. Virtually no progress. The point is, in a democracy, governments change. And governments spar with the opposition on policy issues all the time. But they also honor their international commitments. They don't hold the world hostage to their domestic political exigencies. When Biden came to power, he said America is back. Well, he was right. It's back to riding roughshod over the world. It's day 448 of the Russian invasion. By now, a lot of things are quite clear. Russia will not back down. Ukraine will not surrender. The West will not seek peace. We also know what neutral countries are up to. India, for example, has made its policy quite clear. India sees Russia as an important strategic partner. Hence, trade and talks will continue. And the West had largely accepted this. But now there are murmurs of discontent. Where are they coming from? This man, Joseph Borrell. He is the European Union's foreign policy chief, sort of like their top diplomat. On Monday, he talked about fuel imports from India, how some of the crude may be sourced from Russia. First, let's see what he said. India buys Russian oil, it's normal. But if they use that in order to be a center where Russian oil is being refined and byproducts are being sold to us, we have to act. What exactly is Borrell talking about? To understand that, we need to understand the trade. India buys crude oil from Russia. This is not the fuel you put in your cars or in machines. This is natural and unrefined petroleum, crude oil. Refineries in India then convert this crude into petroleum products like diesel or petrol or other things. So here's what Borrell is hinting at, that Indian refineries are buying Russian crude, then converting them into fuel and finally selling them to Europe. Now, why would that be a problem? Because of the EU's sanctions. Europe banned all Russian oil products in February this year, meaning no crude, no diesel, no petrol. So did India's exports violate those sanctions? Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar was asked this question. He was in Brussels for a meeting with the same Mr. Borrell. It's not clear if Russian oil was discussed, but here's what Minister Jaishankar said.
Because my understanding of the Council regulations is that if Russian crude is substantially transformed in a third country, then it's not treated as Russian anymore. I would urge you to look at Council Regulation 833/2014.
Let me simplify that for you, that argument that he made. Jaishankar says Russian crude undergoes a lot of change in India. To use his words, it is substantially transformed, which means it cannot be treated as Russian anymore. Let's try an example. Imagine you take tomatoes from your neighbor. You make soup with them. Who gets the credit for that soup? The neighbor who grew the tomatoes or you who made the soup? That was Jaishankar's argument, basically. He also quoted an EU Council resolution regarding the same. But the big question seems to be this. What qualifies as a substantial transformation? Is crude to diesel enough? Or are we talking about drastic changes, like crude to plastic, to toys? I guess that's for the governments to debate. But the EU foreign policy chief's words on Monday were not encouraging. He talked about acting against India. And what does action mean? Some media houses are calling it a possible crackdown, but on Tuesday, Brussels clarified its position. Here's what the EU Commission's Vice President said, and I'm quoting again, the issue will be discussed with India, but it will be with an extended hand and, of course, not a pointed finger. You see, this is a highly technical controversy. It's not about the principle, it's about the legal grey area. Having said that, Borrell's comments cannot be dismissed easily. He is the top diplomat after all. When he makes an allegation, it reflects a larger political sentiment. A technicality then becomes a political lightning rod. Was that the intention? Or is Europe seeing a controversy where there is none? Like I said, that's for government officials to debate. But since Brussels is keenly looking for sanctions violations, let me point them across the Atlantic. And take a look at this report. What does it say? US-made technology is flowing to Russian airlines despite sanctions. The headline is just a sneak peek. The details are even more damning. Thousands of aircraft parts made in the US were sold to Russia last year. Around 5,000 shipments in just 8 months. Some of it was complicated technology, like a Honeywell engine starter, which costs around $290,000. Put together, this trade was worth $14.4 million, out of which $8.9 million were linked to Boeing. And where did these supplies go? To Russian carriers like Aeroflot and Rossiya Airlines. In case you're wondering, yes, all Russian carriers are sanctioned by the West. So we let the diplomats and trade officials figure out the oil confusion. In the meantime, let's see what the EU does with Boeing. My guess, nothing. Next week is very important for Kashmir. Diplomacy is coming to the valley. Srinagar is hosting a G20 working group on tourism. Dozens of foreign delegates are expected to attend. It's a chance for Kashmir to shine, a rare chance. But as always, there are troublemakers. Let me introduce you to one. Dr. Ferdinand D. Warren. He is a professor in South Africa. He is also an independent UN expert on minority issues. He has a problem with Kashmir hosting G20 meetings. Let me tell you what he said, and I'm quoting. Holding a G20 meeting in Jammu and Kashmir is lending support to attempts by India to normalize the brutal and repressive denial of democratic and other rights. The situation in Jammu and Kashmir should be decried and condemned, not pushed under the rug and ignored. His words sound awfully familiar. Do you know why? Because Pakistan said the same thing. Unfortunately for them, this is G20, not the G50 or G100. So Pakistan has no scope of directly boycotting the meeting. Instead, they vented at press conferences and on social media. Same thing with the UN expert. The fact is, India is the rotating president of the G20. It can hold meetings wherever it wants, and that includes Kashmir. It's got nothing to do with the UN or the US or any other country. It's simply India's internal matter, no different than a meeting in Kerala or Maharashtra or Sikkim or Uttar Pradesh. India has criticized the UN experts' comments. New Delhi has called it baseless and unwarranted. It has also accused this UN expert of misusing his office. Can't disagree there. Just look at the language used. Normalize the situation in Kashmir that some have described as a military occupation. I have some numbers for you. Almost 20 million tourists visited Kashmir in 2022. 20 million people went there. Why did they go there? To see a military occupation? Or to see a crackdown on human rights? Such narratives are part of a larger strategy, a strategy to keep India in check. I'll give you another example. The US has just completed its annual lecturing ritual, the International Religious Freedoms Report. Once again, it blames India. We downloaded the whole thing. It's 49 pages of criticism against India. I'll give you the gist. Religious minorities were killed, assaulted and intimidated throughout the year. That's what the report says. And how has India responded? Well, this was the statement from the Ministry of External Affairs. I'm quoting again. Motivated and biased commentary by some US officials only serves to undermine further the credibility of these reports. We value our partnership with the US and will continue to have frank exchanges on issues of concern to us. On days like this, you feel bad for diplomats. What do you even say? The US has been releasing these reports for years, but the content never changes. Last year's chapter on India is almost identical to this year's. And look at the timing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is slated to visit the US next month. It's a state visit. What is America trying to say by releasing this report just ahead of the visit? Washington says it's not a government report. It's a non-binding report by an independent panel, but that's a hard sell. For starters, it was released by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It was published on the State Department's website. So Washington may not have authored it, but their footprints are all over. Think of it as a diary for the US government. They cannot officially say all of this out loud. So what do? They release a so-called Religious Freedoms Report. And what's their strategy here? You see, the Americans love to play hero, but their superpower is not flying or super strength. Their superpower is to criticize. Many organizations in the US have tried to direct the superpower towards India. Just one problem though. America needs Indian support in the Indo-Pacific, so open criticism is not an option. Instead, they use such reports. They club India with the likes of Myanmar, China, Iran, North Korea and Pakistan. Those are the countries on the blacklist, the same blacklist that this report wants India to be put on. What company though? A military state, a communist atheist state, a theocracy, a rogue nuclear state and a failed puppet state. Does India deserve to be on a list like this? I think we all know the answer. Such reports are less about the truth, more about narratives. Another one was published earlier this month, the Press Freedom Index. India was ranked 161 out of 180. Guess who performed better than India? Afghanistan and Somalia. I hope the people who made the report remember this video. Armed Taliban fighters held an anchor hostage. They forced him to praise them on live television. I guess that's what press freedom looks like. It's easy to dismiss these reports as irrelevant and non-binding, but they reflect a larger attitude in the West. In their mind, India is still a basket case, a country with no religious freedom, no press freedom, and no human rights. Then why are they engaging with India? Because deep inside, even Western governments know the truth. It's all politics. Meanwhile, the battle between the US and Russia is intensifying. The CIA has announced a mass recruitment drive. They're looking for Russian spies. And where do they hope to find them? On a Telegram channel. Not making this up. You have to look at this video. It was created by the CIA.
Это та жизнь, о которой я мечтал. Тот путь, который я себе выбрал. Почему жизни одних людей ценятся больше, чем жизни других?
This video shows fictional Russian officials at home and at work. They're struggling over a question. Should they reach out to American spies? That's the question they're debating. There is no mention of Putin or the war in Ukraine. The video ends with a message. The people around you may not want to hear the truth. We do. You aren't powerless. Connect with us securely. In the last frame of the video, there are instructions on how Russians can contact the CIA securely. Guess what the response is? Apparently, some Russians have reached out and Moscow isn't pleased about this. The Kremlin says it's watching what's going on.
I don't know. I haven't seen it. But I'm convinced that our special services are also monitoring this space in the necessary way. Given that, and we all know perfectly well that the CIA and other Western intelligence services are not reducing their activity on the territory of our country.
An open offer to spy for America straight from the CIA. Why just Russia? No country would be happy about this. But then again, this is not your average diplomatic relationship. The United States and Russia are sworn enemies. And espionage has defined this relationship, especially in the Soviet era. So these recruitment efforts are not new, really, though the methods may be. The US has been at it for a while, more so after the war in Ukraine began. They see Russia as a quote-unquote potentially rich recruitment environment. And they have clear targets, like Russian government officials and those Russians who recently fled the country. Do you know how many people we are talking about here? Some 500,000. 5 lakh people. That's how many Russians are said to have fled the country. They left in the wake of the war, and the CIA sees them as a good resource pool. They can talk without the fear of being tracked. Or so the Americans hope. In November, a senior CIA official defined the perfect candidate. Let me quote that for you. We're looking around the world for Russians who are as disgusted with that as we are, because we're open for business. It couldn't have been clearer. What do you think Russia is doing in response? It's going after Americans and branding them as spies. This week, an American was charged in Vladivostok. His name is Robert Shonov. He used to work for a US consulate in Russia. Now he's been detained and charged with espionage. He was detained in Vladivostok and he's being kept in a jail in Moscow. The US embassy in Moscow has not said anything about the arrest yet. This isn't the first such, though. Earlier, a journalist was held. His name is Ivan Gershkovich. He works for the Wall Street Journal. He too has been accused of espionage. And the White House has called these charges ridiculous.
These espionage charges are ridiculous. The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms.
But they should expect more of this. Since the Soviet era, both Washington and Moscow have engaged in the shadow war. Espionage is critical to their operations, a way to gain leverage. Let me in fact tell you about the most famous incident of this kind, the Great Seal bug. This was some 60 years back. American officials appeared before the UN Security Council. They presented proof of Soviet spying. And what was this proof? The Americans had found a bug, a device that listened into their conversations. It captured conversations and transmitted sound waves to an external receiver. Do you know where the bug was found? Inside a gift. A gift given by the Soviets to the Americans. The bug was plated inside a wooden carving. This was hung at the ambassador's home, inside his home office for several years. No one knows for sure how much information was compromised. But it's believed that the Soviets got access to a great deal of privileged information. They used to keep a car outside the ambassador's home just to listen to what was being discussed inside. The same thing is happening now, only this time the weapon is far more sophisticated. Since we're on the topic of war, let's look at what India has been up to on that front. It's ramping up its defense capabilities, focusing on conventional weapons like the Brahmos and Pralay missiles. A few days ago, India successfully test-fired a Brahmos supersonic missile, the first such launch from INS Mormugao. It's a guided missile destroyer. Also, the Pralay missile. 120 such missiles were ordered last December. Another 250 will be bought soon by the Indian Defence Ministry. These weapons are used for non-nuclear warfare. India is arming itself considering the border tensions with China and, of course, the perpetual challenges vis-a-vis Pakistan. Unfortunately, both are nuclear-armed nations. So to avoid a nuclear escalation, India needs to be ready to fight a prolonged war with conventional weapons. Our next report tells you more.
The Indian Defence Forces are upgrading their arsenal. their missile arsenal to be specific. India recently test-fired the medium-range Brahmos missile. The Brahmos isn't new, of course, but this test marked the first time it was fired from a guided missile destroyer. The Brahmos missile was launched from the INS Mormugao. The Indian Navy said that the missile successfully hit the bullseye. Brahmos is a portmanteau of the words Brahmaputra and Moskva, rivers in India and Russia respectively. That's to signify that the missiles are jointly developed by the two countries. But India is not resting on its laurels. It's not just relying on the Brahmos missile series. It's also stepping up the production of its Pralay ballistic missiles. Pralay means apocalypse. These are shorter-range conventional missiles. Conventional means they aren't made to carry nuclear weapons. India already has the Prithvi and Agni series for that. The Pralay missiles have a different purpose. They can be used in a conventional war without leading to an escalation. You see, India's most likely adversaries are China and Pakistan. Both of them are nuclear powers. Even if there's a war, none of the countries can really use their nukes. That would be mad. And we don't just mean that it's preposterous. In military terms, MAD stands for Mutually Assured Destruction. Basically, that's where everyone dies. No one will fight a war that way. But that doesn't mean India's neighbors won't try and invade. China tried that in 2020 in India's Ladakh region. There still hasn't been a disengagement there. And as for Pakistan, it has done everything from sponsoring terror to declaring war. So it's a smart idea for India to be prepared. That's where the conventional weapons like the Brahmos and the Pralay missiles come in. They'll help India defend itself without having to resort to nukes. India's Defence Research and Development Organisation, or DRDO, recently finished testing the Pralay missiles. Like we mentioned earlier, they're short-range missiles. They have a range between 150 to 500 kilometers. The Pralay missiles are surface-to-surface missiles, meaning they're launched from the ground. The Pralay missiles will complement India's Brahmos stockpile and give the country an added military dimension. The Indian Ministry of Defence cleared an order for 120 of them last December. Reports say that an additional order for 250 Pralay missiles is in the works. And who will get them? A whole new division. India is planning to set up an integrated rocket force. The IRF will handle India's Pralay and Brahmos missiles. It will also take care of other conventional missiles and India's rocket launch systems. The rocket force won't be in charge of nuclear weapons though. Those will still fall under India's Strategic Forces Command. Nonetheless, India's integrated rocket force will have control over its conventional missile assets, and it will coordinate with other branches of the Indian military. This helps streamline India's defense and plan for a swift response in the face of aggressive neighbors.
Every world leader has a honeymoon period. You're getting to know everyone, the public is just getting to know you, and who knows, they may even forgive you for your policy mistakes. No such thing for Rishi Sunak. He became the Prime Minister of the UK in October 2022. But the battle to replace him is already on. Technically, there is no election until 2025. That's when the current term of the British Parliament expires. But rumour is there could be early polls, maybe even next year. And why is that? Because this Conservative government is deeply unpopular. It was not elected under Rishi Sunak, it was elected under Boris Johnson. He was banished after the Wuhan virus debacle. Then came Liz Truss, like instant noodles, the instant Prime Minister. She barely survived 45 days. And when Liz Truss exited office, Rishi Sunak took over. He's the third Prime Minister in 3 years. Also a weak one. Sunak was promoted by members of the Conservative Party. If he faces the electorate, it's a different matter. So his party colleagues have sensed a chance to replace him in the next election. First in line is Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary of Britain. On Monday, she delivered a speech at NatCon UK. I say speech, but in reality, it was more of a campaign stump. Braverman is a darling of the British right, and her speech was right up their alley. Listen in.
And it's not xenophobic to say that mass and rapid migration is unsustainable in terms of housing supply, public services, or community relations. Nor is it bigoted to say that we have too many asylum seekers in this country for whom we have insufficient accommodation.
It was a rant against immigration, but fun fact, Braverman herself is a second-generation immigrant. Either way, she spoke for nearly 40 minutes. At the end of the speech, she got a standing ovation, so I guess mission accomplished. Braverman has officially sounded the bugle. Thousands of kilometers away, someone else did the same. Sunak's predecessor, Liz Truss, she's visiting Taiwan for reasons only she can explain. Jokes aside, it's a PR trip. The last visit by an ex-UK Prime Minister was in the 1990s, so there's been a gap of almost 30 years, and for good reason. This visit by Liz Truss serves just one purpose, to poke China and to get some headlines. Her speech did exactly that. Listen to this now.
All we can do, those of us who believe in freedom and democracy, is make sure that Taiwan is protected as possible and that the Chinese government understand that there would be severe consequences if they tried to take Taiwan by force.
Truss wants an economic NATO to challenge China. It's a good idea, if only she led with that instead of disastrous tax cuts. Too late now. China has reacted along expected lines. They've called this visit a dangerous political stunt. Both Truss and Braverman are openly challenging Rishi Sunak. Truss on his China policy, Braverman on his immigration policy. Tories may call it the sign of a vibrant party democracy, but let's be real. This is plain and simple infighting. Conservative leaders realize that Rishi Sunak is not popular, so they're rushing to cash in. Earlier this month, the UK had local elections. The Conservatives lost more than 1,000 seats. Every opinion poll shows the Labour Party leading by double digits. So this is a government on crutches. It's just a question of when it falls. Also, who takes the blame when it falls? Unfortunately, it looks like it will be Rishi Sunak. To be fair, most of his problems are inherited. He did not party during Britain's nationwide lockdown. That was Boris Johnson. He did not plunge the pound to a historic low. That was Liz Truss. But he is facing the blowback. I guess that's the nature of politics. Unfair, cutthroat, and relentless. Speaking of Taiwan, it's facing the fallout of Liz Truss's visit. She poked the dragon, and so has America. What have the Americans done? They've promised more weapons, among other things.
We're deepening our ties with ASEAN and the Quad, and I'm pleased that the United States will soon provide significant additional security assistance to Taiwan through the Presidential Drawdown Authority that Congress authorized last year.
As expected, China is livid. It has resorted to its usual temper tantrums. Taiwan says it tracked 9 Chinese military aircraft and 5 naval vessels around the island. This was between yesterday and today. And China's Ministry of National Defense issued this statement.
We would also like to make it clear to the DPP authorities and the separatist forces that any attempt to seek independence by soliciting US support and by resorting to force will lead to nowhere. The Chinese People's Liberation Army will continue to strengthen military training and combat readiness, take all necessary measures to smash separatism in any form and external interference, and resolutely safeguard China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
He says China will do everything necessary to smash Taiwanese separatism. What does that mean? Well, so far it has involved conducting live fire drills around the island, especially after every high-profile diplomatic engagement. Like former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit last year, or Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen's visit to America. She met with current House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. After both these incidents, Beijing went berserk. It increased the violations of Taiwanese airspace. It littered the area around Taiwan with live ammunition. And it made a hue and cry at international forums. Like I said, the usual temper tantrums. China is now likely to step up the aggressive posturing again. Not so much due to Liz Truss. Beijing keeps downplaying her visit, also calling it Instagram diplomacy by the UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister. We mentioned this a while back. More than Truss, it's US President Joe Biden that has riled China up. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also said this yesterday.
Another force is by making sure that you have a combat credible capability. And in investing in the things that we know that will provide us the edge in any kind of contest is the right thing to do. And that includes, in some cases, moving things forward in theater, pre-positioning things. And so I think it takes both of those approaches to have a complete deterrent capability.
The key phrase here is deterrent capability. The US is trying to make the cost of invading Taiwan too high for China to consider. Reports say Biden is planning to approve the sale of $500 million worth of arms to Taiwan. This is on top of a $19 billion arms package that was previously approved. Approved but not delivered yet. This package includes Harpoon anti-ship missiles, Javelin and Stinger missiles, HIMARS rocket and missile launchers, and F-16 fighter jets. The US says that the $19 billion delivery will be expedited. Also, 100 US troops are scheduled to go to Taiwan. What for? Biden says they'll evaluate Taiwan's defense training methods. But China does not see it that way. Here's what Beijing has said.
For some time, the United States has been constantly stepping up its military collusion with Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party by strengthening military ties and upgrading substantive relations, which shakes the foundation of China-US relations and undermines peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The US activities are totally wrong and dangerous. The Chinese side is strongly dissatisfied and resolutely opposed, and has lodged solemn representations with the US side.
Beijing says it is prepared to forcefully reunify Taiwan, and the US is vowed to defend Taiwan. These threats and statements have been flying around for a while now. They've turned the region into a powder keg. One wrong move could lead to disaster. Imagine a world where artificial intelligence governs our decisions, autonomous weapons walk among us, and devastating cyber attacks are launched regularly. Today, all of this sounds dystopian, but the truth is, without proper regulation of AI, this could be our reality, sooner rather than later. AI is part of our daily life. Its great potential has accelerated its acceptance rate. But along with that, it's also increased its dangers. The CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, agrees with this. He's the person responsible for ChatGPT. He testified in front of the US Congress. He told him about the threat it poses, the threat that AI poses. And if he sees the damage coming, what about the rest of the world? Do governments see it? Where are the guardrails? Who is working to regulate AI? Here's a report.
In the past few years, a number of tech luminaries have appeared before the US Congress. And they've all received a dressing down from lawmakers. This includes Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. Because Congress is often upset with tech companies, it's forced to play catch up with these giants and clean up their collateral damage. Now, a new contender has entered the ring. His name is Sam Altman. He's the CEO of OpenAI, the parent company of ChatGPT, the AI chatbot that has practically exploded since its arrival. Now, Altman has become an evangelist for the next generation of AI. So obviously he was invited to Capitol Hill. Another dressing down was expected. What wasn't expected was his agreement with Congress. He spoke about the immense potential of AI, but also the harm it could bring. Altman implored the lawmakers to regulate it. Listen in.
My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to be vocal about that. We want to work with the government to prevent that from happening.
AI is a transformative technology. No one is blind to how it benefits society. So tech giants have been pouring billions into it, including the likes of Google, Microsoft, and Meta. But they've been doing so amid rising concerns of how harmful this tech could be, practically ignoring its role in killing jobs, spreading misinformation, and even becoming as intelligent as humans. This is scary, and the speed at which AI is becoming a part of our lives is even scarier.
Artificial intelligence has the potential to improve nearly every aspect of our lives, but also that it creates serious risks we have to work together to manage.
And that isn't a shocker. Urgent management is needed. But is anyone doing it? There are obviously fears of history repeating itself. Remember when social media took the world by storm? It transformed the world. But the regulations came much later. They're still not up to the mark, and we continue to deal with the repercussions. Governments across the world clearly failed to meet the moment on social media. Is that how they plan to deal with AI as well? The answer is unclear. Some countries are trying, like India. It's now considering a regulatory framework for AI. Meanwhile, the US has been trying for some time now. But their track record is grim. Dozens of privacy, speech, and safety bills have failed in the country. However, other countries are speeding up their regulatory process. The European Union is set to introduce rules later this year. And China has already created laws. But their regulation is limited to compliance with the country's strict censorship laws. So, different countries are dealing with this differently. But their efforts are not enough. AI is flourishing in a perfect storm of unreliability, irresponsibility, vast usage, and a clear lack of regulations. And we can't run from the reality any longer. The fourth industrial revolution is here. So we can either harness the power of AI or become bystanders as it pushes us to a dystopian future.
Since we're on the subject of artificiality, let's touch base with something else that's making headlines: artificial sweeteners. These are sugar substitutes. They come with the sweetness of sugar, but significantly less calories. For decades, they were seen as a miracle of modern science, with the promise of letting us have our cake and eat it too. But here's the bitter truth. They aren't as safe as they're touted to be. And the WHO says this without sugarcoating it. It says these sweeteners do not help you lose weight. Instead, they increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and mortality. So should you stop consuming artificial sweeteners? Our next report tells you. Life is full of irony, and this extends to sugar. Because how can something so tasty be so bad for us? We know that high sugar consumption can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, obesity, among many other problems. So we need to cut down on it. But it's tough, and numbers prove this. The world consumes over 168 million tons of sugar in a year, and this consumption is only growing at 1.4% every year. But let's give ourselves some credit. We do try to look for alternatives to sugar. That's why we invented artificial sweeteners. And they came to our rescue with full force. Today, they are in our homes and restaurants. They are in our sodas, coffees, cereals, and yogurts. Their global market is now worth $7.2 billion. All in all, they're quite popular. Because they give us a taste of sweetness and hope. The hope of not depriving ourselves of dessert anymore, of enjoying that and more without gaining calories. But let's hold that hurrah. Because these artificial sweeteners are more of a trick than a treat. The World Health Organization has released a new report, and it contradicts what the world has believed thus far. These sugar sweeteners aren't making us lose weight. In fact, they don't do anything to control body weight. But not only are they doing their job poorly, they're also creating more problems. They're causing a number of health problems by increasing the risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and even mortality. Imagine if someone lied to you on their CV to land a job. Not only did they do the job poorly, they also created more trouble for the manager. They'd probably be fired, right? Well, that's exactly what the World Health Organization wants for your artificial sweetener. They want you to fire it. But this guideline does not apply to everyone, like people with pre-existing diabetes, for whom these artificial sweeteners are the last resort. They don't need to stop using them just yet, simply because this WHO review does not study people with diabetes. So an assessment cannot be made, at least not yet. As for everyone else, the WHO recommends they go back to naturally occurring sugars, and this time, actually cut down on it. We know it sounds bitter, almost as if science dangled a toffee in front of people and now wants it back. The thing is, nutrition research is constantly evolving. With stronger data, research is coming up with more concrete findings. which sometimes contradict their own previous assumptions. And the newest finding is difficult to come to terms with. But at least now we know that sweeteners do more harm than good. So we can make a conscious effort to slowly ditch them, satisfy sugar cravings with natural sugar, and gradually cut down on that as well. It sounds morose, but health experts say it'll get better with time. And this isn't hollow hope. We can actually train our taste buds over time. Eventually, we will crave lesser sugar. And this is probably worth it, because sometimes the sweetness of life increases in the absence of sugar. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Pakistan. The ongoing political turmoil took a comical turn. Former Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry made a sprint for his life to evade arrest. In Japan, coral reefs off the island of Okinawa were seen releasing thousands of tiny eggs into the ocean. And finally, what makes the 17th of May significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day, West Germany ratified the Treaty of Warsaw. The year was 1972. The treaty was signed between Germany and Poland. Both sides accepted the existing border that was imposed on Germany in 1945 after the end of the Second World War. Then German Chancellor Willy Brandt had to face heavy criticism for this. Critics said the treaty was a betrayal of national interest. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.
Becoming a UK PM.
Well, it's not like that we are going to get the Kohinoor back. But at least India is on its way to the top. Huh?
But Gautam sir, there's actually not much to celebrate.
Why not? An Indian is ruling the UK.
Indian leaders in third countries often tend to overcompensate for their minority handicap.
Key.
For example, Sunak's Home Secretary of Indian origin, Suella Braverman, disapproved of India-UK free trade because it would encourage people immigrating to the UK, and the majority of whom were Indians. Structurally, India and UK have passed baggage, but still hasn't been resolved. And that is why,
ladies and gentlemen, India needs to significantly temper its expectations from Rishi Sunak. Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first-of-its-kind global show with an Indian perspective.
mismanaged vaccination drive, broken healthcare systems, citizens taking matters into their own hands. India's failure in managing the COVID-19 crisis is staggering.
Want stories but without the West spin on it? Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first of its kind global show with an Indian perspective.